Good morning, everyone. My name is Shiza Ali, and I'm a sustainability and climate finance expert working at Zero Point Partners. I'd like to welcome our esteemed panelists for our discussion today on From Seed to Sustainability, Building Systems to Conserve the Planet. According to the World Bank, a comprehensive response to Pakistan's climate challenges between 2023 and 2030 requires a total investment of $348 billion US, which amounts to about 10.7% of Pakistan's GDP during this time. Let's let that sink in. That's a huge chunk of Pakistan's economy. As Pakistan grapples with floods, water scarcity, and a threatening agriculture, climate change remains a critical issue for Pakistan, which cannot be addressed in silos. It is imperative for the public and private sectors to build cohesion and work together to mobilize climate finance and garner sustainable innovation, which can transform climate risks into economic opportunities and build resilience. On our panel today, we have Sophia Hasnain, who is the CEO and founder of Linked Things, Pakistan's leading industrial IoT and digital twin company. Her organization provides smart technology across climate, energy, and water through data-driven solutions. Alongside her, we have Shehan Rayer, who is the Senior Vice President Business Development at Ahya Technologies, a full-stack climate tech company. Ahya's offerings empowers enterprises to decarbonize their value chains and achieve net zero. We also have with us Mekaeel Malik, who is the CEO and founder of Climate Finance Pakistan, an organization that is addressing Pakistan's climate finance gap by building green ventures, facilitating climate finance, and driving policy innovation. Along with him, we have Farhan Anwar, who is the founder and CEO of Urban Collaborative, a consultancy aiming to promote sustainable urban design in Pakistan. Farhan's work spans across urban sustainability, climate resilience, and institutional governance reforms. So as we have a lot of representation from Pakistan's climate businesses today, it's very pertinent for me to ask my first question to you, Sophia.
Thank you.
How are technologies like AI and IoT helping enterprises make real-time decisions and comply with sustainability-related regulations?
Thank you, Shiza. This is a very important question. But before that, I would like to just highlight one thing. And because I'm always asked, how can technology help with the climate crisis? And my usual response is, when I start this conversation, is that this is a man-made crisis. So what we have right now, we know the causes of this crisis, because we know that this is driven by our excessive consumption. This is also driven by the urge of the businesses to maximize their profit. That is why we have got fast fashion, we have got consumerism, we have got plastics all over, we have expanded our urban spaces so much that we are now expanding into the rural areas, and then we are blaming poor farmers for burning their crops, the practice that they had been doing for such a long time. So I think first thing to realize is that this is the crisis that is man-made. And we know the reasons for this crisis, and we also, we have the scientific evidence, and there has a lot of work been done on how to mitigate it. For example, air quality, if we just take it, it is the biggest theme these days. And air quality, we know that is because we don't have proper transportation in our cities. We do not use good grade of fuel in our, generally our construction materials have a problem, and so many other things, along with the the brick kiln and also the crop burning. Where the technology can play, so IoT, so I'm representing LinkThings, which I started 10 years ago, and we built the first weather stations here in Pakistan and first air quality monitors back in 2018, because we believe that you can only manage what you measure. So our logo at that time used to be measure it, manage it. Where IoT-like technologies can really support is validating that there is a problem, confirming the extent of the problem, because we want to get out of the qualitative debate and want to present everything with the quantitative data so that you can make decisions based on the data. So the underlying technology like IoT basically provides you with the data that you can use to substantiate your claims, that you can substantiate to further the conversation and try to find a solution for that. So if I take the example of air quality monitoring itself, which we do extensively across Pakistan, we have been able to figure out the areas where the problem is, the times of the day that are, where the problem is, and also suggest the mitigative effort that are required to improve the air quality. Similarly, when we work with the industries, all of industrial processes need to report their data because of the new regulations that are coming up, where they have to report their carbon footprint. And the carbon footprint is basically their consumption of energy, their water waste, then, and generally in their environment, how much paper they're using and all the other things. So when we do this, we do the accounting from the system perspective, and we provide the real-time information, which is useful for these companies to, build a parallel accounting system on their carbon footprint side.
So from what I heard from you is that data is very critical in addressing environmental and climate-related challenges. Shehan, at Ahya, you have built a climate management and accounting platform. So emissions data is key in your product. Can you please tell me, how can private enterprises be involved in mitigating climate risk in Pakistan and make real impact?
So the first thing to solving any kind of problem is acknowledging the role that we play in that problem's existence, right? And in Pakistan, for the corporate side of Pakistan, everything that's gone on from a climate perspective, we're mostly very reactive to what's going on rather than the other way around. So we don't focus on mitigation, we focus more on philanthropy. Disasters occur. You see corporates from all across Pakistan chipping in and helping in at that time. But when it comes to mitigation, not enough is being done. So right now, if you look at just an overall landscape of Pakistan, we're going through a solar revolution. Everyone's read the article, Bloomberg, et cetera, came out about it. I think 13 gigawatts imported into the country in terms of solar, top 5 countries all over the world. Fantastic. It is a great achievement. It is a positive step in the right direction. However, it's purely being done from a commercial perspective because you understand that you can't rely on the grid. There is a payback period for the solar that you're investing into, so it's a no-brainer for most businesses. My point being that while it's a good step, you cannot make solar your entire claim to managing your emissions and managing your carbon footprint. It is just a singular step. For a company, you have 3 types, without getting technical, there are 3 types of emissions that you have. There's scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 and 2 is pretty much what's within the confines of your company, right? Anyone can measure them, tackle them, figure out ways to at least know what your number is and figure out a way to reduce it. That's where your solar comes in and everything else. To just give you an understanding, Scope 3 typically accounts for 90% of a company's emissions. So you can have all of the solar in the world, and it's not making a difference to 90% of what a company emits. So that's the place that really has to be looked at. Scope 3 is about your value chain. So that's your raw materials, your suppliers, your waste management, your logistics. That's the thing that needs to be looked at, and that's what we have, and that's at Aya, that's what we work on fixing. So it's not easy. Data is one of the biggest hurdles, and we'll come to that in a second. But before that even, it's a process where you can't just use your global sustainability tools. They don't account for the landscape of Pakistan. How are you going to go to a farmer and ask him which vehicle he's using in order to garner his crop? How are you going to go down to that guy who's weaving the cloth for your textile play? It's not going to happen. So what we've had to do is create supplier engagement programs and supplier incentive programs. Companies are basically investing in these programs to basically educate their supply chain on why, A, it's beneficial to them, and B, incentivize them to go on this track so that everyone in that sector can then profit. Because obviously if you take your top two textile manufacturers, get them to do this with their entire supply chain, that's going to benefit the entire sector as a whole as well. So that's what we're typically working on. That's the need that needs to be addressed. And yes, there are regulations. So the SECP has its guidelines for listed companies. The State Bank has its guidelines for all financial institutions. However, that's the stick. It never works that way in the world. Regulations come in when you come in and disrupt an industry, and there's already work being done around it, and then the regulations come in to support it. We can't wait for regulations around Scope 3 for private listed companies. You can increase valuation, according to McKinsey. There are several studies done. You can lower your cost of capital. There are several ways for companies to tackle this and be commercially viable and not have to wait for regulations to come in.
So Shehan, I hear from you that there is opportunity to innovate and propel novel climate technology in Pakistan. Mekaeel, I'd like to ask you, how do we convince both local and foreign investors that Pakistan's climate risk is actually an economic opportunity?
Firstly, Ji, a big thank you to you and the entire Disrupt team for having me, and congratulations for another stellar edition. I'm going to go a little desi and really explain what I feel the problem is. And I feel like I'm also a part of the problem. So for example, outside my climate life, I have a family business group. And I have tried for years to convince the board that we need to make climate-friendly investments. So being here, I have been partly successful because of what I do, but I have not been successful in my eyes. And that is the start of the problem, right? And I say this from a lens where in a family business group, we have a number of foreign investors parked in fintech, real estate, and a number of other initiatives. And it's been very easy for us to reel them in. But whenever I talk climate to the same entities in the UAE or in the UK, they're not willing. Because we have a severe PR problem, right? And that PR problem is the fact that the cost of capital is so high in this country, and the risk associated is so high that actually fundamentally makes no sense for them to park their climate capital that is actually supposed to be responsible capital here. So the first thing we actually fundamentally need to do is drive domestic capital. और इसका सबसे देसी तरीका ये है कि अगर मैं अपने घर में पैसे डालने को तैयार नहीं हूँ, मैं बाहर से कैसे किसी को कह सकता हूँ कि मेरे घर में आके पैसे डालो, right? So that is the core of the problem. And जो भी capital दुनिया में कहीं भी fly करता है, it's always based on the fact that it is a human-to-human interaction, right? So I am from Lahore, I'm probably not very comfortable doing business in Karachi as an example. तो मैं शायद क्योंकि मैंने सोचा होगा कि यार लाहौर का शायद रूल ऑफ लॉ ज़्यादा है कराची से, एज अ बैड एग्जाम्पल, राइट? तो उसी तरह जब मैं इंग्लैंड से एक इंसान को कहूँगा कि पाकिस्तान आके इन्वेस्ट करो, तो उसको एक लोकल रिलायबल पार्टनर चाहिए होगा, जो एक बहुत लाइफ की रियलिटी है. और यहाँ पे क्योंकि क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस लैंडस्केप में आपको वो लोकल रिलायबल पार्टनर्स नहीं मिलते, तो वो जो उनको भी स्टिक चाहिए टू से कि यार आई एम कंफर्टेबल, आई वांट टू गो इनटू बिजनेस विद दीस पीपल, दैट्स एब्सेंट. And then there's this whole jungle when you talk about absence of legislation, the problem within the federation and the provinces. So to my mind, there's a number of brilliant stories like जैसे अभी आपने कहा solar की, you know, we're a top 5 solar adopter country in the world. 4,500 gigawatts इस वक्त हम installed capacity पे, that's an insane figure. हम कॉप पे जाते हैं और मैं पिछले कुछ कॉप से पाकिस्तान गवर्नमेंट को हेल्प कर रहा हूँ, तो हम क्या बात करते हैं, लाहौर वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट कंपनी में इन्वेस्ट करते हैं. यार आप जाके बताओ कि यू आर द 5th लार्जेस्ट सोलर अडॉप्टर इन द वर्ल्ड, दैट योर कंट्री इज रेडी फॉर रिन्यूएबल्स. येस, इट्स बिकॉज ऑफ द कॉस्ट टेबल दैट इज एसोसिएटेड, बट दैट डज नॉट मीन इट्स नॉट अ ब्रिलियंट स्टोरी. आई थिंक वी हैव अ PR problem. We don't sell what we do well, and then we have a negative PR problem because of a number of other reasons of what we see on Al Jazeera and CNN and BBC. So when I'm talking to international people outside the multilateral banks who possibly have to invest capital in Pakistan, there's actually very little appetite because the ground does not seem conducive. And to my mind, the ground is not that bad. You look at EV mobility, it's a phenomenal story that we can talk about later. Solar is a phenomenal story. Waste management is a phenomenal story. Water access is a phenomenal story. And these are stories that will have quantifiable dollarized returns. We're doing a number of projects right now on carbon markets. Punjab में activate हो चुका है, सिंध पहले से active था, KP active होने लग गया, and the dollar values on these are tens of millions of dollars per transaction, and they're not rocket science. It's just that, you know, we need to get our desi safe to say for 2 seconds कि 30% नहीं मिल सकता इस साल, 2 साल बाद दे दूंगा promise. So that to my mind is the, you know, the crux of the matter.
Absolutely. I think we need to be better at sharing our story for how far we've come along in our sustainability journey and the impact that we've made through innovative technologies. So shifting the focus to urban centers, the concrete jungles that we live in, where urban island heat effect has impacted our health infrastructure and hindered economic growth. Farhan, can you comment, in your opinion, what is the single most critical urban planning reform needed to stop our cities from overheating?
Thank you, Shiza, and thank you, Catalyst Lab, for... Thank you, Shiza, and thank you, Catalyst Lab, for creating the space for this very important discussion. We have been talking about climate change, and one very important thing to understand when we are talking about climate change is that it is a phenomena which does not respect any national or regional boundaries. It's probably the most potent challenge facing humanity as a whole right now. And although Pakistan's contribution to the greenhouse gas pie is less than 1%, but we are continuously, you know, being rated as one of the most affected countries in terms of impacts around climate change scenarios. So when it comes to extreme heat, there's a lot that is happening globally, you know, that is contributing to extreme heat events all over the world, and there's not that much that we can do about it. But yes, when you're talking about urban heat island effect, that is internal. Mm-hmm. And also another important thing to consider is that there are different ways to tackle the climate change challenge. Mitigation is more applicable to countries that are major contributors to climate change, where they cut down on their carbon emissions. But for countries like Pakistan, yes, mitigation is also an area where we can work on. But most important is adaptation. In terms of, yes, changes are happening, and in many cases, you know, there's not much that we can do about it. But at least we need to be resilient. We need to be resilient. We need to create those adaptation strategies and plans and frameworks within which we can better, you know, withstand the impacts of these challenges. And that is where, when it comes to extreme heat, yes, urban heat island is an effect which is mostly urban. And when we are talking about dense vertical growth, and if it is not done in a very planned manner, it, you know, creates those heat traps where certain actions that are contributing to, you know, increasing heat levels within the city, you know, heat gets trapped there, and it kind of comes out in the form of a plume in the evening, and you have, you know, where you're talking about central business district and the more vertical dense growth, they become much more hotter than the actual temperature on ground. So I think there's not one single, I think, policy action that I can say will have that kind of an impact. It's a set of actions that we need to take within a larger adaptation and resilient building framework. Two things need to happen. One is that, you know, what are the factors that are contributing to, let's say, causing urban heat island effect? There's no definitive evidence that it is happening, let's say, if I talk about Karachi, but all the indicators are there. So what are the factors that are contributing to that happening? One is, of course, the densification that is happening is Karachi is not planned. It's not, vertical growth is good. There's nothing wrong with vertical growth. In fact, we are going for compact cities rather than horizontally spread out and sprawling cities. So vertical growth is good, but it needs to happen with the proper social and environmental safeguards and planning mechanism, which is not happening. Then, of course, mobility, Sophia talked about mobility. This is a city where, we are automobile friendly. Now, we are not going towards making the city, for example, non-motorized transport friendly city. For example, all over the city, all over the world, you see cities are becoming walkable friendly cities, bicycle friendly cities, which we call non-motorized transit. Here it's an automobile friendly city, and so we are adding to that heat load that is happening in terms of the exhausts that are coming in. Then we still are, at a very preliminary stage in terms of green building standards. So our buildings, our commercial buildings, our residential buildings, our industrial buildings are adding to the heat load. So that is an area that we need to look into, how we can transition into a green building, scenario, how we can move towards a city which is friendly, friendly to walking and cycling. And then very importantly, mitigation is another area, and I quickly conclude, is that when you're talking about urban spaces, normally, you talk about 25% is a figure that we talk about in terms of green space coverage within an urban space. In Karachi, it's not even 4%. And green spaces act as mitigating factors. For example, they act as thermal conditioners. So if you are having, these kind of impacts in terms of increased heat, so then they act as, that kind of a buffer. So we need very urgently to have an urban forestation plan. And then very importantly, we need to build resilience. For example, which are the communities, which are the people with the assets which are most vulnerable to, extreme heat events? Well, for example, in Karachi, we have been continuously having these, heat waves. But who gets affected? Not us, but the man on the ground, the labor, the elderly, the sick. So how are we going to build that kind of a resilience? So I think to sum it all up, we need to have an adaptation framework. This city in Karachi still doesn't, and I don't know, maybe Islamabad has it, a climate change adaptation strategy. We don't have it. We need to have that. And we need to strengthen the institutions that are going to, have this kind of a strategy implemented. Build resilience and build adaptation within our, communities and cities.
Yes, and that resonates with how linked things is building smart cities and smart industries. Sophia, can you please shed some light on how can the adoption of climate-resilient technologies be incentivized to prepare enterprises against these climate risks?
Yeah, I think it's an important question because, as my co-panelist said, technically got into the scope 1, 2, and 3. All of Pakistan's exports are basically scope 3 for the world. So for the importers, like for the textiles that we export, all of Pakistan from our largest exporters down to their value chain, it's all scope 3. And it has become a nightmare globally to see that, not just from Pakistan, but the exports from Bangladesh, from Vietnam, from India and Brazil and all the other countries, like how to actually put a value on the scope 3 emissions. Again, then the technology comes into play where we can use technology adopted by our exporters to provide authentic data to their buyers, basically, to create that kind of trust on their part. And that's very important because I'm not talking about the US, which has taken a different trajectory these days, but there are even, the Far East and the European markets are still very, very conscious about carbon footprint, getting the exact emission values on the scope 3. We have also heard of things like digital product passport in the European Union, which is actually going down to the T-shirt level, if you want to talk about that. Like, what is the carbon footprint? You might have seen tags on your T-shirts which said, 90% cotton and 5% polymer and, 4% nylon or whatever. so they are looking at even putting a carbon footprint tag over there, and there are a lot of efforts going on to basically make the data visible and create provenance of it. I think the problem that countries like us face is that these technologies are very, very expensive. So when you put IoTs and even these the other technologies that come that you can put a print on the fiber itself, these are very expensive and not affordable. So I think there has to be some way to monetize this data, and that is where our policymakers need to focus. Because if the DPP and other regulations become strict, these basically compromise our export, and our whole focus is on export. So I think some policy has to come here where we see how we can actually monetize the data that is being produced by our exporters across the value chain. So from farm all the way to the shipping and logistics. How we can actually have systems that produce reliable data, and how we can actually incentivize and bring some kind of ability to monetize that data, so that there is the whole ecosystem and everybody is supporting it. Because it's not no longer going to be about exporting T-shirts or jeans or whatever we export, but also about providing reliable data about it.
And from what you said earlier, we cannot reduce what we don't measure.
Exactly.
Shehan, I'd like to ask you, what role does emissions data play in improving climate innovation in Pakistan?
So emissions data is basically like the wild, wild west right now. So it is the biggest impediment, forget Pakistan, globally, it's the biggest impediment keeping companies from accurately measuring and reporting on their emissions, right? So it's a problem that's being faced the world over. There are, again, not to get technical, there are 3 forms of data. So let's say tier 1 is where you basically use an average. So let's imagine you go to a doctor and they give you a full body scan. It's the equivalent of the doctor being able to tell you that you have a problem, but we can't tell you exactly where it is and exactly what the fix would be. So that's your tier 1 data. Tier 2 data is where you actually are measuring according to either local emission factors or activity data. The biggest problem in Pakistan is that there are no local emission factors. There are about 3, 4, maybe 5 at best. So most people are stuck in tier 1. What we've tried to do at Aya is take activity data, which is the action that you're performing, be able to equivalently take AI, map it according to emission sources, and be able to tell you the closest determinant factor, the most relevant determinant factor for that action and the emissions that occurred behind it. So that's one step, right? AI has to be used in that way, because otherwise we're not going to get there. It's going to take far too long if we're going to depend on regulatory bodies to come up with a set of emission factors. It's just not going to work. The second thing is that when you have a problem statement, that's where real innovation comes from. Gianara, when she was just doing the opening for today, she mentioned that, right? That startups, in the startup ecosystem, when there's a problem statement, that's when real great ideas and creativity comes from. So at Aya, one of the biggest problems we were having in real estate is the client comes to us and he says that a lot of my stuff is just in handwritten notes, because that's what construction companies are like. And it's written in either Arabic or Urdu or different languages, and they're all in just undocumented format. So that's again where AI comes in, creating a model which can basically capture that unstructured data and have it accurately give you a tier 3 level carbon emissions footprint, or at least a document where you can then understand where you're bleeding cash, where your energy costs are too high, and what the problem is that you have to fix. So if there's one biggest problem we have, it's around data. If there's something that you're working on in this room as a startup, as a fully fledged company, it's if you can fix that, And that's something that we and I are trying to do. That's our entire ethos. That's our entire focus. That when we sit with a company, the biggest issue that we have is that value chain and is in trying to structure that data in a way that doesn't, A, cost you an arm and a leg. So cost is super important, like she brought up. And B, is that your time to value has to be much quicker. So that's where we are in this ecosystem right now. There is fantastic work being done around it locally. There's more that could be done with the minds around this room to come up with solutions that can be adapted by companies like us and the rest of us here on this panel so that we can get there faster.
So AI has been critical in helping your enterprises manage their emissions. And climate finance is also a very critical lever for sustainable innovation. In the past decade, the average annual climate financing received in Pakistan is estimated to be between $1.2 to $2 billion. So, Mekaeel, I'd like to ask you, how can the private sector push the government more effectively to create a one-window facility to ease in acquiring climate finance?
For that, I'd like to unpack this 1.2 billion figure. आपने start में बताया था कि there's a $350 billion gap that we need to fill, right? So for that, by 2035, we needed about $40 billion per annum to actually fix that. अब $40 billion चाहिए, आपने कहा 1.2 billion आ रहा है. अब इस 1.2 billion की भी खूबसूरती ये है कि इसमें से 1.1 billion लोन बुक है. तो एक्चुअली जो ग्रांट या equity financing आई है, that is less than $1 billion. To be exact, it's actually less than $500 million. So what you're doing is, you have a country which is struggling with debt, you've piled on a heap of debt, which you're not going to be able to fulfill, and then you have zero actual private sector capital alignment, so which is why this gap of $40 billion is just going to balloon. So let's just see where that goes. So that's the first problem. The second problem is the federation and the provinces and the controversial 18th Amendment and what it did to the environmental topic, right? So मैं थोड़ा सा बस इस मेज़ को समझाने की कोशिश करता हूँ और हम कितना स्ट्रगल करते हैं पॉलिसी कंसल्टेंसी में. So when you talk to the federal government, there are three layers. So there's the Ministry of Climate Change, but they have no money, so they go to the Ministry of Finance. But they don't have the capacity to think, so they go to the Ministry of Planning and Development. So there's three layers, and all three of them, lovely individuals, have had their own climate finance units built. And they don't like talking to each other because they want their own power levels in these circles. और फिर उससे ज़्यादा funny बात ये होती है कि none of them actually have execution authority in the province because after the 18th Amendment, it's a provincial topic. So when you go for action, you have to go to the Suba. So when you go to the Suba, there is a EPA or there is a Ministry of Environment, or for Sindh, it's Forest. For GB, it's the Chief Secretary's Office. For Punjab, it's Environmental Protection Agency and Coordination. So there is this insane circus where you have no money, the little money you have is a loan, and then you have three policy makers who have no say over the province, and within the province you have another dichotomy. So I'm just trying to explain to you that there is no way, excuse my French, in hell that you're going to solve this maze. And I have been running around this for a few years now. So my problem statement that I keep begging all policy makers is, can we please sit down on one table? Make this single window that we keep talking about. And then came the beautiful layer of the SIFC that was supposed to fix all of this. I'm not going to go into that because I know what happens after that. So I'm just going to say that there is a problem, and a single buzzword is we operate in silos. Until that keeps happening, you're not going to fix anything. There is no private sector consultant, development agency, foreign capital that's going to fix it unless you have coordination. Oh, and the best part of all of this is, we've been working on some private capital injections for the last year and a half, and the best part we found out was Pakistan government did not have legislation to allow that money to come in. And then when we got that legislation to move forward through individuals and entities, the first question was, we don't want to pay foreign consultants because they will take a chunk of the money, so they just left with the money. So hamari puri government is so wired to take on loans that we are just not willing or ready or like have the capacity to actually start deploying private capital. And there is no country in this universe that has actually grown without the deployment of active private capital, both domestically and on the foreign side. So that's my gist. I hope it's not very pessimistic, but that's where we are right now.
So structural change is needed to address Pakistan's climate challenges. Farhan, I'd like to ask you, what role can public-private collaboration play in balancing profit, environmental sustainability, and social impact in Pakistan's green economy?
Yeah, that's a very important question, Shiza. And by academic training, I'm an urban planner and I'm also an academic, so I keep a close watch on how, forms of governance, structures of governance, whether at the urban scale or the national scale are changing and, new innovations are coming up. And it's a global trend that, the government has less to do now in terms as compared to the past. वो जो पहले होता था ना सरकार सब कुछ करती है, तो अब वो नहीं है. The government is now not being considered as the provider of all, but rather a guarantor to ensure that all are provided for. So this subtle shift that has happened has opened up a lot of opportunities for non-formal actors to also become part of the governance construct. So that is something that is happening and it's creating a lot of dividends also. There are challenges, of course, in terms of regulation, in terms of the type of policies and facilitative structures that you need to create. So that is happening and it is creating a lot of dividends. And it's also making the processes much more inclusive, much more participatory also. And we are moving from that top-heavy approach of decision-making and policy-making to more inclusive and pluralistic, ways in which we kind of come to that. And it needs to happen here. I'll just pick up from what Mekaeel was saying. In order for all that to happen, you need to have that kind of institutional and governance space, which can, for example, private sector को अगर हम लाना चाहते हैं, तो private sector क्यों आएगा? ठीक है ना, अगर उसको अपने पैसे की सिक्योरिटी नज़र नहीं आ रही, अगर उसकी डिसीजन मेकिंग में प्रॉब्लम्स हैं. सो इन टर्म्स ऑफ हाउ वी क्रिएट दैट स्पेस, कॉन्ट्रैक्ट मैनेजमेंट है, लोगों को इंगेज करना है, कम्युनिटीज़ को कैसे इंगेज करना है, उसके क्या मैकेनिज्म डेवलप करेंगे, किस तरह हम अपनी जो एक फिक्सेशन है ऑफ क्लोज डोर डिसीजन मेकिंग उससे निकल के हम ग्रास रूट लेवल पे आएंगे. और उसमें वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट आई थिंक इज़ दिस काइंड ऑफ इसको मैं कहूँगा कि opening up this window. कराची जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल, एंड आई विल कंक्लूड, आई नो हमारा टाइम ऑलरेडी ख़त्म हो चुका है, कि कराची में फॉर एग्जांपल देयर इज़ इंडस्ट्री, देयर इज़ फाइनेंस, देयर सर्विसेज सेक्टर, हर चीज़ का हेडक्वार्टर है, लेकिन दैट स्पेस इज़ नॉट बीइंग क्रिएटेड एंड इट कैन हेल्प अ लॉट इन मेकिंग दैट हैपन. और मैं आई कंक्लूड कि इस वक्त जो ग्लोबली जो ट्रेंड है उसमें ये है कि व्हेन वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट गवर्नमेंट, तो इट्स मोर इन टर्म्स ऑफ पॉलिसी एंड रेगुलेशन, जो गवर्नमेंट का रोल स्ट्रॉन्ग है. And then in terms of service provision, in terms of, what is happening on ground, in terms of implementation of policies, space has been opened up. But हमारे यहाँ अगर इस किस्म का experiment को successful होना है, तो एक तो ये है कि policies ऐसी होनी चाहिए, policies that create the space. फिर हमारे गवर्नमेंट इदारों के अंदर वो कैपेसिटी होनी चाहिए कि वो इस किस्म के इनफॉर्मल स्टेक होल्डर्स को किस तरह इंगेज करेंगे, उसके मैकेनिज़म्स क्या हैं. एंड देन वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट रेगुलेशन है. जैसे अगर हम प्राइवेट सेक्टर की बात करते हैं, वो बॉटम लाइन प्रॉफिट ही होता है. तो इन टर्म्स ऑफ जो भी वो काम हो रहे हैं, अगर हम कोई सर्विसेज प्राइवेट सेक्टर को दे रहे हैं, तो उसमें हाउ वी कैन प्रोटेक्ट पब्लिक इंटरेस्ट, सो हाउ वी कैन क्रिएट दोज रेगुलेटरी mechanisms that can facilitate this kind of thing happening. So yes, I'll conclude by saying that this needs to happen. For it to happen successfully in a sustainable manner, a lot needs to be done, and I personally feel that space is not totally there, but we need to work on that.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank all the panelists for their insightful, valuable insights today. It's from what my key takeaway from this discussion is that both the public and private sectors have to play their parts respectively to ensure a sustainable future for Pakistan. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.